everyone, and welcome to Global 360, webcast produced by the Washington Diplomat, which has been the premier source of information for DC's diplomatic community for over 25 years now. I am the Diplomat's managing editor, Anna Gawel, and normally in previous webcasts, I have talked with a fellow journalist, but today we have a special guest, Dr. Peter Mills, who is the European Medical Director for Cigna and based out of London. So Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Anna.
So for those of you who may not know, Cigna is a US-based health services company that operates around the world. It actually began 225 years ago as our nation's first marine insurance company. So obviously since then, Cigna has significantly expanded. And on that note, it's not just a worldwide health insurance company. Its mission is to improve our overall well-being by making healthcare simpler, more affordable, and more predictable. And goodness knows, we could certainly use a bit of predictability in these uncertain times. So we are very fortunate today to have Dr. Peter Mills with us, who is also a medically trained doctor specializing in pulmonology and infectious diseases. So we're looking forward to his insights on the coronavirus pandemic, especially as we're coming up on roughly half a year since the pandemic really gripped the world's attention. And today you have some, not all, parts of the world that are in the midst of reopening after weeks of lockdown. And that, of course, includes the DC region here. Just this past Sunday, I was driving by and saw people dining outside for the first time in what felt like months. Likewise, I actually have a meeting tomorrow at an embassy. Obviously, there'll be reduced staff and special security precautions, but that's beginning to start up again. And I think this raises two overlapping issues. One, of course, people are understandably concerned about returning to work and resuming their interactions with others after weeks of quarantine. And two, this region, like so many parts of the country, are reopening at very different stages. So we have here in one county restaurants that can operate at 50% capacity, and literally just a few miles over, all non-essential businesses remain closed. So I think all of this really compounds the confusion that people have, as one embassy or one office will look very different than the next as we entered this kind of brand new phase of uncertainty, if you will. So Peter, let's start there. Let's say I've gotten word that my office has reopened and I'm expected to return. What questions should I be asking? What kind of expectations should I have to ensure that I'm returning to a safe working environment?
That's a good question, actually, Anna, and that's something we're increasingly being asked as an insurer to many organizations, be they corporates, governmental organizations like embassies, or the NGOs and the IGOs. Each workplace is different, and there are nuances to how you should go about opening your workplace, but there are some consistent factors as well that I think people who are managing workforces should pay attention to. I think the first is properly risk assessing your employee base. We know from the last few months that there are certain members of society that are more susceptible to not necessarily catching the virus, but having a bad reaction and developing a more severe disease. So I think the first thing should be systematically risk assess your population. Are there any individuals who are in that shielded group, who have chronic conditions, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, immunocompromised, those sort of conditions? Secondly, look at the population in terms of their age, their gender, their ethnicity as well. because we know the older you are, the more male you are. If you are from a Black or Asian minority group, the chances of you having a bad reaction to the COVID virus, to the coronavirus, are higher. So I think that's a good start. But then on top of that, testing. And what we have now is we have two approaches to testing that are not mutually exclusive. We have the PCR test that detects whether you have the virus at the moment, and then you have the antibody tests which detect whether you have had the virus at some stage in the past. The combination of those two can really then start to inform which members of your employee base are at less risk. I don't think you can ever say are at no risk, but are at less risk if you get them leaving their home, potentially taking public transport, and coming to the workplace, to the embassy. So risk assessment, testing, and then of course the structural changes that may need to be done to the workplace. Are there ways that you can modify how people move around the office space or the embassy environment? Are there areas where you need to have screens if people are interacting with the general public? Do people hot desk? Probably shouldn't be hot desking at the moment. And what cleaning processes and regular cleansing is in place for the office environment? Finally, PPE. Are you going to require your staff to wear face masks, gloves? If so, are they going to have to provide them, or are the embassy going to provide them? So a number of questions that really need to go into creating a good protocol process, if you like, for getting people back into the workplace.
Mm-hmm. And now you mentioned testing, and that's obviously a difficult area in the US and many other countries. I mean, are you optimistic that at least among, embassies, but also just large and small companies and businesses, that they will eventually be able to employ the kind of testing that would help them gauge, how to move ahead?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the area is changing rapidly. There are a number of organizations now that are offering back to work testing processes and offerings for employers. So again, I think the first thing is to start to say, okay, let's look at our population as a whole. Let's risk assess them. Let's then start to look at, okay, is there a cohort of that group that makes more sense bringing them back to start with? And we're going to be learning things as we go along as well. No one's done this before, so it's okay not to get it right first time. But to put in place as many of the checks and balances that we know should be in place from the beginning. So there are organizations that can offer testing on a private basis for organizations who are wanting to get their staff back to work and wanting to make sure that they stay well as well.
Now, what about also, say my office, my place of work is putting in safety measures that I'm comfortable with, but now I have a very important meeting with a completely different office, and I'm concerned that they're much more lax. I mean, is there any kind of practical advice of how, as a person who's concerned, I might go about dealing with this kind of scenario?
This is going to be a real problem going forward. I think you're one of the first people I have talked to who is not just going back to work, but then actually going to other workplaces to go back to meetings. I think if you're concerned, you have a right to ask, okay, what measures have you put in place in your workplace to reduce the risks of me catching the coronavirus, or in fact, me passing it on to members of your staff? So I think you're perfectly within your rights to actually say, tell me more about this. Before I even think about coming to your workplace, I need to understand what you're doing and what measures you put in place.
Yeah. And so now, obviously, just like us, the medical community is figuring things out as we go along. And I think for the public, it's difficult because you get a lot of conflicting information as the studies go on. And so I wanted to talk about not just, you're indoors in the office, you are also outdoors.
Hmm.
And people are slowly re-emerging. And, we've heard a lot of different things in terms of how long the virus can remain in the air, for example. So what are some of the advice that you have for people that want to begin resuming activities outside, but are worried about doing so?
Yes. So I think, as you said, we are learning as the weeks and months go by. One of the things that we know from other coronaviruses, and this is in some ways an assumption, but it's the best evidence that we got at the moment, is that the incidence in society, in the population, does get less during the warmer months, during the summer months. And we're seeing that in many countries around the world, where we're seeing the incidence of new cases and the number of deaths decreasing quite considerably over the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks or so. So I think we've got less of a disease burden within the population in general, which is a good thing. We know that being outside is probably better than being inside. So if you are going to start to re-emerge from your isolation, from your quarantine, choosing outdoor activities, outdoor places to go are best. And again, use some protection as well. There's been a lot of debate about, does a face mask really prevent you getting infected? But if you think about it logically, you've got a physical covering over your mouth, over your nose. We know that that's where the virus gains entry into our body. And again, if you are still really diligent about your hand washing, I think the stores now have got hand sanitizer gel back in stock. There was a period of time, certainly here in Europe, when we just couldn't get any in any of the shops at all.
I even saw surgical masks at a store the other day,
okay,
which is unimaginable 2 months ago. So exactly, as you said, we seem to be progressing in terms of the supplies needed.
So, and then take it step by step. But there is still a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns, and that can drive fear. So the recognition that it's okay to be anxious about this. It's a normal reaction. And take it step by step. Start with the outdoors first of all. Small journeys out if you can, and then build up from that.
Mm-hmm. And now, just a quick note before I forget, for people listening to this discussion, and if a question comes up during it, you can go to our Twitter site, which is @diplomatnews, and ask a question, and we will try to get to it at the very end. So just a quick reminder on that note. And I was reading the other day, so far the latest numbers, we have 7 million people around the world infected, over 400,000 deaths. But of course, many experts, say those numbers are difficult to track and could be much higher. And I thought what was really notable was the recent study published in the medical journal Nature, which found that shutdowns prevented 60 million coronavirus infections in the US and nearly 300 million in China. You have another study from your place, London, that estimated that the shutdown saved over 3 million lives in 11 European countries. So, are you personally, as a medical doctor, worried that as we reopen, a sense of complacency will set in and we might undo all of this progress and sacrifices that we've made so far?
It is a concern in the scientific community, that if we do open too quickly, if people just get too fed up with the lockdown conditions, that we will see a second wave of the virus. So, the message that is going out from governments around the world is, still to continue to make sure you're taking the safety measures, make sure that you're washing your hands, that you're doing the safe distance from people, etc., and only making essential trips outside of your home confines. As I said, I think as we're getting into the summer, and what we know of coronavirus is the instance and the transmission is probably going to be less during these summer months. So I think we've got a little bit of a, I wouldn't say a free pass, but we've got a little bit less of a problem than we had in January, February, March time. It's just the seasonality of respiratory viruses that we know. And by reducing or by stratifying, if you like, how we get people to work, and still making sure big sporting events are not, or big events generally speaking, are not held. And I think we're probably not going to see many, if any, big sporting events or concerts and things like that this year at all. So I think we have a number of measures in place. We probably will see a little uptick, but I'm hopeful at least that we won't feel that it's a real significant spike.
Right. And so obviously most people agree that the shutdowns have saved lives, but they've certainly also taken their toll in many other ways as well. I mean, obviously there are reports of people who deferred seeking medical treatment, and then of course you have the tens of millions of people who have lost their jobs, where experts are concerned about an increase in depression, anxiety, even suicides. So let's talk about, and you still have many people who are working from home and dealing with the isolation and the stresses that come with that. So, Peter, can you tell us more about how people can improve their overall well-being in these very stressful times, in general, whether it's going back to work or again, still staying at home for for the foreseeable future? How can we kind of deal with this overall mentally and emotionally?
Yeah, I think you're right, Anna. There's a number of factors that have led us to for this to be an extraordinary period of time for us. There is as we mentioned, the uncertainty, the fear, a lot of the unknowns. Much of that is still there. The forced, if you like, quarantining of large portions of the population, either in lockdown alone, and you get the loneliness associated with that, and the loss of connectivity with other people, or you've got people in lockdown with their family members, and they've never spent so much time with their family members ever again. And even though these are their loved ones, that can really lead to significant relationship issues. And unfortunately, we've seen increase in domestic violence and those sort of issues in society as a whole. On top of that, we've got the employment issues, many people furloughed. Sadly, a lot of people actually lost their jobs as well, and the uncertainty and the financial impact that can have. But even us who are fortunate enough, if you like, to be able to work remotely, work from home, the expectations of our employers in terms of wanting us to still be productive, still be delivering for the organization. So there's a lot of stress associated with that. And of course, the additional responsibilities. Many people have commented on this, the homeschooling or the looking after of elderly relatives, especially if they're remote, and how do you manage that? So a lot of things that can really drive our, or be negative for our mental health and our emotional well-being. So one of the things that we like to advocate at Cigna. One of the things that I often tell clients and customers is our mental health is really, really important. I don't think we've ever had such a consistent population-wide assault on our emotional well-being as we have over the last 3 or 4 months. Mm-hmm. And this is, and the problems and the world we're living in is not going to go away. It's tempting to think that because we're starting to open up societies a bit more, we're starting to get back to a degree of normality, that we're on fourth base, that we're finished. We're not. This is going to be with us for a number of months, possibly even the next 12 months or so. So, okay, it's going to be less severe in terms of the lockdown that we've got, but the impact, the uncertainty is still going to be there, and whether you recognize it or not, it is having an impact upon you. So one of the things I do advocate is putting in place what we call a plan. And then conveniently,
we've got a nifty slide.
We've got a nifty
nice
slide with 4 different things that you should try and do every day. So the first is to set aside a period of time each day when you can unwind. Now that depends on where you are and what your situation is. But to really get a period of time where you can just be on your own and have your own thoughts. Great if you know how to meditate or do relaxation techniques, but just a period of time for yourself. Find a comfortable location. This can be for that period of time, or it can be a separate thing during the day. A really comfortable location where you can relax and spend some time on reflection and contemplation. Don't list through all the things that you have to do for work. Get yourself an activity that you enjoy and try and do it every day or most days. Now, this might be an exercise, or it may just be reading a book or taking a bath. But find yourself something that you really enjoy, that actually gives you a sense of well-being. Whatever that is, practicing your golf swing, it could be anything, but make sure you get time for that every day. And then the final thing is have the name of someone, preferably a number of people, so that every day you can speak positively to someone. Have a positive interaction. Remember what you did at school. Remember how you were when you were at college. Remember when you were working in that embassy, wherever it was in the world, and what a great time you had. And we know that if we're deliberate about these things, it can boost our emotional well-being and our psychological health.
Right. And I think what's key about it, and what you've done so well, is that it's concise and simple, but has a huge effect. And I think that's what people are looking for. So I want to switch gears just a bit and get your thoughts. We talked a little bit about the immediacy of it, but get your thoughts on what lies ahead in the months to come. I mean, you've mentioned seasonality, which is something we're all waiting for. Here in DC, we had a horrible spring. Actually, it's cold and windy, so it wasn't actually that difficult for people to quarantine. But now the weather is finally changing. You mentioned it a bit, but what are your thoughts on seasonality in terms of, we've had a lot of conflicting reports that we shouldn't count on that necessarily to, have the virus simmer down?
We shouldn't count on it, absolutely. And, I don't want to suggest that that this is absolutely going to happen. I think we're starting to see it. As a respiratory doctor, as a pulmonologist, I see a lot of people in the winter and in the spring, early spring months, with viral respiratory infections, and we do see that drop down in the summer months. So we're hoping if you like, that that's going to be the case with this coronavirus. Other coronaviruses, that was the case with. So we're hoping that's going to be the case. I think, though, on the flip side of that coin is that we will see an uptick in the fall into the winter as well. So we may get a little bit of respite, if you like, during the summer months, but we will see an uptick towards the end of the year and into the cold months. Right. But on the positive note, I was on a webinar today about vaccines, and on this webinar were a number of individuals from different academic institutions and also pharmaceutical companies. They are working faster than they've ever worked before on vaccines. This will, when a vaccine comes out, and I'm sure one will, it'll be the fastest a vaccine has ever been produced by a long way from when a disease was identified.
This time frame of fastest, I mean, we really are pinning so many of our hopes on a vaccine. And I've heard 18 months, I've heard 4 years, I've heard the fall, and obviously nobody really knows. I mean, doctors don't know, researchers don't know, but you know, what are you thinking? Your thinking on time frame, but also what do you want to caution people about when it comes to vaccines?
So there are a number of organizations and academic institutes working on vaccines. I think there's something like 150, 160 different vaccine initiatives going on.
All around the world, too.
All around the world. So the firstly is finding one that confers an antibody response, and then working out, okay, is that actually materially relevant? Does it actually protect you against the disease then? So there's a couple of steps. Today, when I was listening to some of these eminent researchers, they were saying, look, 18 months is the earliest from the start that we're going to have anything. So that's really going to be next summer. So I think the earliest we are going to be able to have anything that approaches a mass population vaccine is going to be for the fall or winter of 2021.
That's quite a ways away. And so that also gets, you mentioned the second wave. We may not have a vaccine prior to that second wave. And of course, this leads to a lot of comparisons with the Spanish flu of 1918, which for people who don't know, had a very deadly second wave in the fall and a third one after that. But so this, of course, has created a lot of fears that we're going to be in the same pattern. So what are your thoughts in terms of this historical comparison with the flu of 1918 and 1919?
Yeah, I think that was the last big pandemic that we as humankind have known. But actually, if you
we are seeing, just so you know, some of the numbers which are really interesting.
If you go back through the centuries, almost from the beginning of time, and certainly from the beginning of when we have any records or historical documents, there have been pandemics in the human race. So this is not a new phenomenon. Obviously now our understanding of infectious agents, how infectious agents are transmitted, and how we can at least provide supportive care to people who become unwell is so much better. And we look at some of these plagues, these historical plagues. They were decimating the world's population. As much as a third of the world's population was dying back in those days. And don't forget also the constant threat until relatively recently of smallpox and polio around the world as well. That was just a constant there. So although this feels so extraordinary for us as individuals, this is not an abnormal phenomenon. This has been happening for centuries, for millennia. and we will get over it. So it may be that normal is not really arrived at again for another couple of years, but we will get over it. And I think one of the key things that we should start thinking about is what are the good things that we want to take from this? What are the things that actually have been positives in our lives that we want to potentially take from this and integrate into our future world, if you like?
Well, it's nice to hear some positives, but coming back, recently, to another question people have related to the pandemic, and that has emerged, especially with countries like Sweden, is this concept of herd immunity. And, we've heard a lot about herd immunity. Sweden has been criticized, and it's kind of a working experiment. I was reading, we certainly haven't reached where a lot of people have yet to be infected with this, and 10% or whatever, obviously the numbers fluctuate. So what are your thoughts in general about this idea of herd immunity and how much importance we should place on it in terms of this current pandemic?
Ultimately, the combination of a vaccine, potentially treatments that reduce the severity of the illness, and herd immunity, those three things are going to get us out of this, so this coronavirus will become like a lot of other seasonal infections that we get, viral infections that we get. It'll probably still be around, and it'll probably still affect elderly or less well individuals on a yearly basis, like flu does. But in time, this will be another of those infectious agents that is there, but there is a degree of herd immunity. Well, there's a significant amount of herd immunity. You've come across it, and it's only when the virus mutates significantly that your immune response won't recognize it that we'll see little upticks in it, just like we do with flu on an annual basis.
Yeah, it's interesting to read of, for instance, today, New Zealand's been declared coronavirus free, but, at the same time, I think that many experts are saying this is something we will have to learn to live with in one way or another, just as we do, like, as you said, with the flu and different other diseases. But now you talked a little bit about this earlier, but obviously looking not just in the months ahead, but in the years ahead, what are some of your predictions of the kind of activities that will eventually resume to relatively look normal, and the other types of things that will be part of our new normal, whether it's sporting events or even simple things like handshakes and hugging?
This is
there'll
this
still
is
be hugging among family members and
futurology.
Friends,
but my friends from Spain were saying the reason they got so much coronavirus there was that they all hug and kiss each other twice when they greet. I'm not sure that's the case, but
it's very culturally ingrained.
Yes, much more touching in the southern European countries. I predict, and again, I'm not speaking from any position of knowledge really in this aspect. I predict we'll get back to pretty much normal in 2 years' time. Hopefully, we will have a little bit more focus on our hand hygiene and our cough and sneeze hygiene. So hopefully, at least for a period of time, people who have a cold, who have a cough, will stay at home, and it'll be acceptable to stay at home rather than soldiering into the office, getting on the metro or walking, you know, in the busy street or whatever it is, coughing and spluttering. Hopefully that will rub off on people the right way, and they'll say, actually, you know what, I have a duty to not infect other people. Right. And the hand sanitization and things like that. Hopefully that will stay with us. But I certainly see that our big sporting events and our travel will resume.
Mm-hmm. And you know, and that's an interesting fundamental shift of where, especially in the U.S. and in Europe, you know, it's viewed as a admirable quality to soldier through and go to work through a cold, whereas in other parts of the world it's the opposite. You know, it's seen as a more admirable quality to stay at home or to put on a mask. So it'll be interesting to see how that mentality might change. So, and as
we've shown that we can work remotely, and that, or in many aspects anyway, many industries, that you can be productive while still be at home. So rather than soldiering into the office, infecting everyone in the office, stay at home for the week, do your work at home. That I hopefully will be a positive thing that we get out of this.
Well, pajama sales will go up, so that's a stock investment. So we do have a few questions that we received from Twitter that we want to include. So Sven from Europe asked, what are the implications here for global tourism? Do you think that the industry will be able to revive itself?
I certainly hope so. There are so many economies around the world, so many people reliant on tourism for their livelihood, that I certainly hope that the global tourism industry will bounce back. I've had to cancel my summer vacation. I was due to go to Mallorca in August, but that has been cancelled. I think it will. I think we have so much, not just tourism, but business travel and the need to go to different places. I think we'll get back to that. Maybe we will think a little harder about how many people we cram onto a plane, or how many people we cram into an airport at one time. But I certainly hope that we'll be back, and I think we will be.
Yeah, and I won't lie. I mean, if they want to give us more space on an airplane.
Yeah, it might be more expensive, but
so exactly. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for your insights on what are going to be critical months ahead, and what we're going through right now at the moment. I also want to extend a thank you to our sponsors today, Cigna and Sahori Insurance, which an insurance company has been serving the diplomatic community now for over 50 years. So you can learn more about Sahori at sahoriinsurance.com. And Cigna also has a very helpful resource center on the coronavirus on its website, cigna.com. And finally, of course, you can visit our own website, watchdiplomat.com, to view this webcast, and as well as a lot of the previous webcasts that we've done. And we will have more to come, because, you know, the news cycle does not end, for better or worse, but we'll be trying to stay on top of it. And I hope this offered a lot of practical information that people can use as we try and navigate this brave new world. So I want to again thank you, Peter, so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And of course, thank you everyone from home, from work, from an app, from a website, wherever you happen to be. Thank you for joining us, and please stay safe out there.